So I've been spending a few minutes in here each night touching up some of the drywall. Since I'm not an expert, it takes me a couple coats on the corners to get everything feathered in just right. Because if I do one wall going to the corner, then I have to leave that to dry before I can do the next side of the same corner. Otherwise, I'll be scuffing the wet mud that's on the other side. But here's another trick that I've learned. I have this light source over here. If I lean the light perpendicular to the wall that I'm working on, I can see the pits and the valleys of the drywall mud much easier. So because I'm trying to get closer to priming, I'm gonna go ahead and start marking the areas that I need to sand. I also have a flashlight here that I can use for some of the tougher spots. And it's important that it's pencil, something that's only going to leave a very shallow scuff mark, because when I sand over this, I want the pencil mark to disappear. If I use something very runny, like paint or a marker, it might go too far in and I won't be able to sand it off. You can see I'm doing all sorts of shapes. I'm trying to follow the contour of the rough spot so I know exactly where to sand. If it's just a tiny little dimple, like if I hit the back of my trowel on some wet mud, I'm just going to put a little circle around that. That's how I know it's a tiny little patch. But these long ones are following in the entire edge of a feathered in joint compound spread that I put across the whole wall. So I haven't even touched this spot for sanding yet. That's why the entire top and most of the bottom feathering is marked with pencil. So I'm going to keep going around and switch this over to a time lapse so you don't get too bored. Now that I have my pencil marks clearly identifying all of the pits and valleys and the texture of the drywall, I'm ready to touch up with a thin layer of drywall compound. This is a watered down mix of store-bought pre-mixed compound and water, and I'm using my 6-inch taping knife because I'm most comfortable with that tool out of all of the different trowels that I own. You can see here there's not really a consistent methodology. I'm just kind of taking a close look out of anywhere that I've drawn on. I'm trying to find the angle of the scuff mark or the texture, and I'm trying to go across that and feather it in. Obviously, if it's just a little hole that I drew a circle around, I can put the trowel over it in any direction.
But if it's a long scuff mark caused by feathering, then I need to go fully long ways across that entire mark just to make sure that everything is going to be nice and smooth. But the key to this layer here on this trip is to make the coat as thin as possible. That way it can dry quick and I can get a coat of primer on, hopefully in the same day. So we'll see later in this video if I get to meet that expectation or not. You can see that the compound doesn't really obscure the pencil mark as much as I thought it would. Primer meant for sealing drywall is going to seal all the pores in the drywall and definitely cover any color that it has. So I'm not worried about these pencil marks at all. Sorry about the LED lighting in this. I can't really control what it does to my camera, but as you can see here, I'm ready to prime. The thin feathered edges I did with the most recent coat of drywall mud has sufficiently dried, and now I'm starting on the ceiling and working my way down with this very small paint roller. I wouldn't recommend a roller this small for rooms larger than this, but because of the tight quarters and the fact that I'm constantly knocking over my lamp and any tools I have around here, I feel like smaller is better. You can definitely see some of the green shining through, and I'm hoping once the primer dries that won't be as obvious, but we'll have to wait and see if that theory is correct. I'm not filling up my pan completely with paint because of the possibility I might drop it, and also it causes a lot of fatigue to be carrying so much paint at once. So every time I walk out of the frame here, I'm actually going to pour more primer into this tray. I don't actually smell any fumes from this primer like you would with a lot of paints, but I do have the window open just the same. That's mostly to make sure there's enough airflow to quickly cure the primer, so I can be ready for another coat pretty soon if I need one, or hopefully a coat of paint. Here's the last wall I have to prime. It's going on pretty thick. I'm pretty pleased with the way it's covering, but I am a bit skeptical about the green showing through. This time I want to do a light sanding with a more fine grit type sandpaper across the entire surface that's going to be finished, so that excludes behind the shower. And then I want to put another coat of primer on there, just in case, because that mold-resistant drywall that I used, that's rated for moist environments, is green. And in the thinnest spots, you can see a bit of green through, and I don't want that to affect the paint. So I'm going to do another coat of primer, and then I'll start getting to the paint. I have ceiling paint. I don't know what makes it good for ceilings, but it's marketed as a ceiling paint. I got 1 can of that. Hopefully that can definitely finish the bathroom, but hopefully I can use that in the living room as well. But then we got some clearance paint that had already been mixed to the proper color or something. I don't really know why they put them on the clearance rack at Lowe's, but we got kind of a weird color. You'll get to see that. As with every coat I do, I'm working from the top down. So I started with the ceiling and made my way down each of the walls. But before I move the ladder, I like to go ahead and complete the upper portion first, and then gradually move lower and lower until I'm finally squatting down at the floor, and then I'm putting the roller sideways so I don't hit the drop cloth that I have on the floor. It's quite dusty and muddy. It's the next morning. I did my second coat of primer. Now, everything is white. I don't see a bit of that green from the board underneath. I have the heater running. I figure that might help with the painting process just a bit. But I need to do a quick sanding on all of this, all of these surfaces. I'm going to paint the ceiling white and the walls the surprise color. This is a pole sander. While it's certainly possible with a room this size to do it by hand, I find it easier to use a pole than to climb up and down the ladder a bunch of times to try to get every inch of the walls sanded. Because this is round, I can't actually get the corners, so I do go around the edges and the corners with my sanding sponge, but for, I would say, at least 95% of this room, I'm making 2 passes with a sanding disc. I'm going vertically and then horizontally. That way I can blur any kind of scuff marks that I might be making I don't want a bunch of stripes on the wall that'll be showing through on the finished paint. Speaking of finished paint, I now have a tray containing my ceiling paint, and I'm doing what the professionals call cutting in. I'm not really doing it as nice as a professional would do it, because this color white is actually the same color as the primer, and if I get a bit on the walls, well, it's not a big deal because my paint is pretty dark, and I'm pretty confident that when I cut in with the paint, it's going to cover any of this white paint that I may have got on the walls. So it's important to cut in with a brush because a roller could transfer paint to the walls. Like I said, it's not that big of a deal with this specific project, but then I'm doing the rest of the ceiling with a paint roller. I'm basically continuing this process section by section because I have to move the ladder to keep up with the painting progress that I'm making. I'm holding a brush and the tray in one hand and then a roller in the other. And then when it's time to cut in again, I swap the brush and the roller, and then I kind of do this section by section. My electrical boxes and fans are all recessed, so I can kind of go right over those edges, and those are going to be covered with fixtures anyway, so even if I got paint on the wires, no one's ever going to see it. As promised, here's a close-up of our paint color. Angie and I both love purple, so regardless of whether this dries lighter or darker, I think it'll be nice for us. This bathroom looks great after only one coat of paint. I think that says something about the effectiveness of the primer that I used. I did use 2 coats, so maybe that helped, but the paint dried so fast that I was able to continue working on the electrical fixtures in the room. As you can see, I connected the light fixture and the vent fan, and now I'm moving on to the GFCI protected receptacle. The lights and the fan are on the same circuit, and they don't have a lot of draw, so they can share the same circuit with the rest of the building, but that's a separate circuit than the GFCI protected receptacle, which is on a dedicated circuit just for the bathroom, but it's also the only outlet in the bathroom. Since there's no vanity in this bathroom, I decided to mount the receptacle at the same elevation as the light switches. We'll just have to use the laundry sink on the other side of this wall to wash our hands. Got the lights. I don't know if you can hear the vent fan. I bought one that's specifically very low noise. Need to buy a plate for that. But I had some used plates and light switches. I just threw that in here. I bought a new pack of GFCI outlets. I don't know if this is required here. I don't really know exactly where they measure from, but since it's in the bathroom, I'll just throw in a GFCI, whatever. I was about to install the toilet and the shower, but I'm one fitting short, or one material short for each of those as well. I need a new toilet flange that sits inside the pipe instead of outside, so hopefully I can get a hold of one of those. The shower base is slightly out of level. I have it shimmed up right now to level, and it doesn't look too bad. I can fill the edges with some backer rod and some caulking if I need to, but I'm planning to buy a can of spray foam so I can put a few dollops under there and then set it down until my level shows that it's perfectly flat, and then I can shove that nozzle of the spray foam underneath and fill up the rest of the way, because I don't want just a couple points of support. The pan is full of styrofoam, so I know that foam is strong enough for the weight. I just need to evenly distribute it underneath to keep it all level before I start building up the wall. And by building up, I mean I have a pile of lumber over there. I need to rip some of them down because for some reason Lowe's doesn't carry 2x3s anymore. And my shower dictates 2x3s. Each of these little ribs, I guess you would call them, will have framing underneath to keep it rigid. I guess instead of using a strong material, they use something very, very flimsy, and it's up to the lumber to support it. All right, I'm going to get out of here now. If you want to see me finish all of these projects in the next couple weeks, please go ahead and subscribe, and I will see you next time here on Kind Heart Homestead. Bye.